In the year 1295, Europe was a continent of kingdoms locked in shifting alliances and rivalries. Among the greatest of these powers stood France and England, two neighboring realms whose histories were bound together by blood, ambition, and centuries of tension. Their kings claimed lands on each other's soil, their nobles intermarried, and their armies clashed in wars that shaped the very identity of medieval Europe. France, under the rule of King Philip IV, known to history as Philip the Fair, had become one of the most organized and centralized monarchies in the West. Philip was shrewd and calculating, determined to strengthen royal authority and expand his control over both his nobles and the church. His reign was marked by sweeping reforms, heavy taxation, and relentless political maneuvering. It was also during his reign that France reached new heights of influence and wealth, and the Capuchin dynasty stood at the height of its power. Across the Channel, England was ruled by another formidable monarch, King Edward I, remembered as the Hammer of the Scots and the English Justinian for his conquests and legal reforms. Edward had brought much of Wales under English rule and fought determinedly to assert dominance over Scotland. His reign was characterized by military strength and a deep sense of order, though it came at the cost of heavy taxation and unrest among his barons. Despite their shared royal ambitions, the relationship between France and England was fraught with complexity. English kings, through their ancestral lands in Aquitaine, were technically vassals of the French crown, a situation that constantly threatened to erupt into conflict. At the same time, both realms understood the importance of diplomacy, and marriage was often the weapon of choice in maintaining fragile peace. It was in this world of power and politics that Isabella of France was born, a princess destined from birth to serve not only as a symbol of royal grace, but as a living bridge between two rival kingdoms. She was the daughter of one of France's most powerful kings and would become the wife of one of England's most controversial rulers. The destinies of these two royal figures, Isabella of France and Edward of England, would soon be joined in marriage in an alliance meant to bind two nations together. Instead, it would lead to one of the most turbulent and extraordinary reigns in medieval history. Isabella of France was born around the year 1295, likely in Paris, into one of the most powerful royal families in Europe. She was the daughter of King Philip IV of France and Queen Joan I of Navarre, two monarchs whose marriage had united vast territories and immense wealth under the Capuchin crown. Philip IV, her father's reign was defined by his relentless efforts to strengthen the French monarchy. He was known for his conflicts with the papacy, his taxation of the clergy, and his suppression of the Knights Templar, actions that earned him a reputation for both brilliance and ruthlessness. From an early age, Isabella was trained to embody the virtues of a queen: grace, intelligence, and restraint, qualities that would serve her well in the years ahead. France in Isabella's childhood was a place of order and ceremony. The king's daughters were valuable assets in the game of dynastic strategy, and Isabella's future was discussed in these terms almost from birth. Across the Channel, England was undergoing its own transformation under Plantagenet rulers. King Edward I was nearing the end of his long and formidable reign. His campaigns in Wales and Scotland had expanded his realm, but his ambitions came at great financial cost. His heir, Prince Edward of Caernarfon, had grown up in a very different world from Isabella's, a prince known for his easy charm, physical strength, and deep affection for his companions. Edward's relationship with one in particular, Piers Gaveston, would later come to define his early reign. The two shared a close bond that scandalized many of the English barons and clergy, who viewed Gaveston's influence as dangerous and unseemly. But in the early 1300s, the focus was still on securing an alliance that would ensure peace between England and France. After years of diplomatic negotiation, an agreement was reached. In 1307, Edward I died, and his son ascended the throne as Edward II of England. One of the new king's first acts was to renew the marriage arrangements with the French royal house. In January 1308, the marriage between Isabella of France and Edward II of England was formally celebrated in Boulogne. Isabella was around 12 or 13 years old. The ceremony was attended by nobles and dignitaries from both nations, and the union was hailed as a symbol of peace and cooperation. But beneath the outward splendor of the wedding, signs of trouble were already apparent. On the very day of the ceremony, Edward's attention seemed fixed not on his new bride, but on his favorite Piers Gaveston, whom he had recently recalled from exile. The English king's open affection for Gaveston, showering him with titles, gifts, and honors, caused whispers even at the wedding feast. For Isabella, still so young and far from her homeland, the reality of her new life must have been daunting, yet she carried herself with the composure expected of a queen. When she was crowned Queen of England at Westminster Abbey in February 1308, the people of London welcomed her with great ceremony. But the celebrations were overshadowed by growing resentment toward Gaveston, who appeared beside the king in royal finery and was treated almost as an equal. Still, Isabella maintained her dignity, supported her husband publicly, and began to navigate the complex web of English court life. By 1312, Isabella had given birth to her first child, a son who would later become King Edward III. This strengthened her position in England and secured the continuation of the royal line. By 1311, the situation reached breaking point. A group of barons, known as the Lords Ordainers, forced Edward to exile Gaveston and limit royal authority. But Edward's loyalty to his companion proved stronger than reason. He recalled Gaveston soon after, defying his nobles. Rebellion followed, and in 1312, Gaveston was captured and executed by the barons. The king was devastated, but Isabella, who had just given birth to their first son, Edward of Windsor, provided a momentary sense of stability. For a brief period, the royal marriage appeared to improve. Edward leaned on Isabella for comfort, and she fulfilled her duties with quiet diligence. But England's problems went far beyond the walls of the royal household. Discontent among the nobility deepened, the treasury was drained, and the king's authority weakened. In 1314, Edward marched north to confront the Scots in an effort to reclaim control of Scotland, a campaign that ended in disaster at the Battle of Bannockburn. The English army was decisively defeated by Robert the Bruce, and Edward's humiliation was complete. The loss crippled his reputation as a leader and emboldened his enemies at home. At the same time, Isabella's father, Philip IV, died later that year, and her brother Louis X ascended the French throne. In the years that followed, new tensions arose. Edward's reliance on favorites did not end with Gaveston's death. A new figure rose to prominence, Hugh Despenser the Younger, a man whose ambition and greed surpassed all others. Despenser and his father quickly became the most powerful figures at court, enriching themselves through confiscations and royal patronage. The Despensers' dominance poisoned the political atmosphere of England. Many barons were stripped of lands and titles, while the Despensers expanded their control across the kingdom. Even Isabella found herself a victim of their hostility. Her estates were seized, her household reduced, and her influence over the king eroded. By 1321, opposition to the Despensers erupted into open rebellion. The barons, led by the powerful Mortimer family, took up arms against the king's favorites. For a time, Isabella appeared to serve as a mediator, pleading for peace between her husband and his nobles. Yet Edward's loyalty to the Despensers was unshakable. When he regained control, he punished his enemies harshly, executing or exiling many of those who had risen against him, including Roger Mortimer of Wigmore, who would later play a decisive role in Isabella's life. By now, the Queen's position had become intolerable. Her marriage was effectively broken. Edward trusted the Despensers above all others, and Hugh the Younger treated Isabella not as a queen but as a rival. In 1324, conflict once again flared between England and France. The issue concerned Edward's French territories in Gascony. Isabella's brother, now King Charles IV of France, demanded homage from Edward for these lands. Reluctant to leave England, Edward sent Isabella as his envoy to negotiate with her brother, a decision that would change the course of both their lives. When Isabella arrived in France, she was received not only as the Queen of England, but as a daughter of France. In her homeland, she was treated with the respect that had long been denied her in England. Negotiations began, but Isabella had no intention of returning to her husband's court. Instead, she remained in France, citing her mistreatment by the Despensers as justification for her refusal to return. While in France, Isabella encountered Roger Mortimer, the same nobleman who had once rebelled against Edward and fled into exile. The two shared common cause. Both had suffered under the Despensers and both sought Edward's downfall. Their alliance quickly deepened into partnership, political at first, but soon personal. By the year 1326, Isabella of France was no longer the quiet queen consort who once stood beside her husband in Westminster Abbey. From her base in France, Isabella, together with Roger Mortimer, began to gather allies. Many of England's discontented nobles, exiled courtiers, and former enemies of the Despensers rallied to her cause. Even her brother, King Charles IV of France, offered cautious support, allowing Isabella and Mortimer to raise forces and resources on French soil. The pair's relationship had become more than political. Together, they planned an invasion that would strike at the heart of Edward's weakened rule. In September 1326, Isabella and Mortimer set sail from Normandy with a small fleet, no more than a few hundred soldiers, knights and mercenaries. It was not the size of their army that mattered, but the mood of the kingdom they were sailing toward. England was ready for revolt. Years of economic hardship, political favoritism, and the Despensers' tyranny had left the country bitter and restless. When Isabella landed on the coast of Suffolk, the response was immediate. Nobles, townspeople, and even members of the clergy flocked to her banner. Edward II, caught off guard, attempted to muster resistance, but his authority had collapsed. The barons deserted him, and even his household officers abandoned their posts. As Isabella's army advanced through the countryside, Edward and the Despensers fled westward, first to London, then into Wales, seeking safety and support that never came. By October, Isabella had taken control of the capital. London welcomed her as a liberator, and she installed her son Edward of Windsor at her side as a visible symbol of legitimate rule. The Queen's forces pursued the king relentlessly. In November, Edward and Hugh Despenser the Younger were captured near Neath in South Wales. Edward was imprisoned under guard, while Despenser was brought before Isabella and Mortimer to face judgment. His trial was swift and brutal. Despenser was condemned to death. Chroniclers record that his execution was among the most gruesome of the age, a final act of vengeance for years of corruption and cruelty. With the Despensers gone, Isabella and Mortimer stood as the true rulers of England. Yet they could not openly claim the crown. Instead, they moved to legitimize their authority by forcing Edward II to abdicate in favor of his son. In January 1327, the king, held at Kenilworth Castle, was compelled to sign a document renouncing the throne. His 14-year-old son was proclaimed King Edward III of England. Isabella and Mortimer now ruled as the guardians of the young king, effectively controlling the government in his name. For the first time in English history, a queen had orchestrated the overthrow of her own husband and assumed power through direct political action. In the months following the abdication, Edward II remained a prisoner, moved between castles under heavy guard. Officially, he was treated with dignity, but rumors soon began to spread of plots to restore him to the throne. His continued existence was a threat to Isabella and Mortimer's fragile hold on power. Then, in September 1327, word reached the royal court that the former king was dead. The official report claimed he had died of natural causes while imprisoned at Berkeley Castle. Edward II was buried at Gloucester Cathedral, where his tomb can still be seen today. His passing marked the end of one of the most turbulent reigns in medieval English history. Isabella's first months as regent were marked by popularity and relief. Many in England viewed her as the savior of the kingdom, the queen who had freed the nation from corruption. Parliament formally recognized her authority, and she and Mortimer took control of the royal treasury and council. In the early days, their governance promised reform and moderation. But power has a way of revealing character. Mortimer, once the exiled rebel, now wielded authority with the confidence of a king. He took for himself vast estates, many of them confiscated from supporters of the late Edward II, and distributed titles and lands to his allies. Isabella too claimed large revenues and maintained a luxurious court. Though she ruled in the name of her son, her partnership with Mortimer became the focus of both gossip and resentment. In foreign affairs, Isabella's regency faced immediate challenges. The Scots under Robert the Bruce remained a constant threat along the northern border. In 1328, Isabella and Mortimer negotiated the Treaty of Northampton, recognizing Scotland's independence and Robert's right to the throne. While the treaty brought peace, it was deeply unpopular in England. Many saw it as a humiliating concession, a sign of weakness. In 1328, Isabella arranged the marriage of her son, Edward III, to Philippa of Hainaut, securing an alliance with the Low Countries that had supported her during her exile. But as Edward matured, he began to see how little power he truly possessed. Every royal decision, every council meeting was controlled by his mother and Mortimer. They signed documents in his name, commanded armies, and dispensed justice as though they ruled in their own right. By 1329, the young king's frustration had grown. Mortimer became increasingly overbearing, adopting the title Earl of March, and surrounding himself with guards and symbols of royal authority. The situation reached its breaking point in October 1330. Edward III, now 17 years old, decided to act. Though still young, he had the loyalty of several trusted knights who shared his resentment of Mortimer's dominance. While Isabella and Mortimer held court at Nottingham Castle, believing themselves secure, Edward and his allies plotted a coup. Late one night, the king and his men entered the castle through a secret passage. There, Mortimer was seized without warning. Isabella, startled from her chambers, is said to have cried out to her son for mercy. "Fair son, have pity on gentle Mortimer." But the young king did not waver. Mortimer was arrested and taken to London. Within weeks, he was put on trial before Parliament, accused of usurping royal power, enriching himself unlawfully, and being complicit in the death of Edward II. On November 29, 1330, Roger Mortimer was executed at Tyburn. His body was left hanging for 2 days, a grim warning to those who overreached royal authority. Isabella's fate, however, was different. Though implicated in Mortimer's rule, she was spared the same punishment. Edward III could not bring himself to execute his mother. Instead, she was stripped of her political power and her vast estates and sent into comfortable confinement. Isabella spent much of her remaining life at Castle Rising in Norfolk. Her relationship with Edward III gradually stabilized. He respected her position as Queen Mother and ensured she received generous allowances. By the early 1350s, Isabella's health began to fail. On August 22, 1358, Isabella died at about 63 years of age. She was buried at the Franciscan Church at Newgate in London, a resting place consistent with her devotion to the Franciscan order. And that is why history remembers Isabella not simply as a queen, but as the She-Wolf of France, a title born from her daring rebellion against Edward II, her role in his downfall, and the fierce determination that set her apart from every other medieval queen of her age.